Oh, is that what that is?
There you go.
There you go. I hear that.
So we also have a request for the recorded version of it from the U.S. Office of Trade Adjustment Assistance.
That's great. So
I need to get that to them, however it is that you do that.
all right, so we're going to start admitting people, and start in about 4 minutes or so.
Cool.
All right, here we go.
Oh, and we should mute each other too.
Good morning to Mission College's seminar this morning. We're going to wait a few minutes for everyone to come on. But for those of you who are timely, thanks for joining.
And just to let you know, anyone who can't join us this morning, we will have this taped on Facebook Live. Also, we'll have another a way to watch it as well. So please reach out to me. I'm Neil Adler. I'm the Director of Marketing here. And we can get it to you if you're interested. So there'll also be a brief survey afterwards just to tell us how we did. But we really appreciate you guys coming and joining us this morning. And also just to let you know, we're going to mute the participants, but also let you know that if you do have a question, please put it in the chat, and we will try to answer as many questions that we can throughout the morning as well. So.
The calm before the storm.
I think we'll get started here in just a few seconds. We'll give the last couple of people a chance to get on.
And we are gonna go live to Facebook right now. So we want to welcome everyone in and let everyone know, welcome to Mission College's live webinar on co-ops and small businesses. And I'd like to thank you for coming this morning. And we will send it off to Kirk, our host, to fire it away. So Kirk, I will send it to you.
Actually,
So I'm actually gonna pass it off to Rob just for a minute, just to do a quick intro to folks, and then I'll pick up from Rob.
Thanks, Kirk.
Yeah.
Good morning, and thank you for joining us. I'm Rob Gamble, the Director of Workforce and Business Development here at Mission College in Santa Clara, California, because I know some of you are from out of state this morning. Mission College is at the geographic center of Silicon Valley and is the home to a lot of truly huge businesses that are known around the world. But all those businesses started as small businesses. And in order to support that, Mission College is developing the Mission College Small Business Extension. Our goal is to help small businesses grow here in the Valley and to support those businesses as best we can. Today is our first seminar, so thank you for joining us to our birthday. Today's workshop, COOP101, is the first in a series of courses developed to support the conversion to employee ownership. We think employee ownership maybe we think employee ownership is a valuable tool for small businesses and for communities who want to try and save those businesses or support them in their further growth. Now for today's host, or for today's speakers. First, I'd like to introduce you to Dr. John McNamara, the Senior Development Specialist for the Northwest Cooperative Development Center. Grant Rorody, a planner and researcher for the City of Encinitas. And Kurt Vartan, the founder and general manager of Slice of New York. Take it away, guys.
All right, thank you, Rob. I'm just gonna do a couple quick housekeeping things. It's not gonna take long, so just bear with me on this. On Zoom, everyone knows how to use Zoom. Keep yourselves on mute. Use that chat box right here to get in questions that you may have throughout here. And if there's something that's really pressing, you can go to reactions and raise your hand. And your video, when you're on the Hollywood Squares, will kind of jump to the upper left, and that'll kind of let us know that you're really anxious, something really important is coming up and you need to take care of. People ask, so why are we doing this now? What's the need? What are we talking about? I'm going to be presenting later a bit about our transition to worker cooperatives, but the real need right now is how do we get people to go through this process? But right now the challenge is time and money. And typically it takes 12 to 18 months, sometimes longer, to do a conversion for good reason, with a lot of education, a lot of training, and kind of a slow roll to get you familiar with a lot of the concepts. That also takes money. It can cost, $10, $20, sometimes $30,000 to convert. So the purpose of this is how can we change that dynamic a little bit, reduce that time, and reduce the cost as well. One other thing to consider, we just threw this in here, before, especially during COVID, this became really kind of heightened. This program started before COVID, but when COVID hit, it was something that kind of rang even a little stronger. Before you close your business, give your team a chance to take it over. Like this is a way to do that in a financially viable way. So we have three audience types that we're talking to today. The first audience is the owners, like people that own businesses, whether they want to retire, get out of the business, have a succession plan, or just want to sell the business or just reduce their time. That's the first group that we want to talk to. The second is the workers in the organizations, any organization, people that maybe want to start their own business or be an owner and get more involved, take more responsibility. And then lastly, how can cities and municipalities help support worker ownership and this entire process? And that's really the three target groups that we're talking about. We're going to be addressing each of these in our discussion today. So today's workshop's broken into three pieces, just to give you, I like to tell people what they're going to get before they get there. We're going to give you a basic introduction to cooperatives. We're going to have a transition example that I'm going to be presenting, and then how can governments get involved and why, and what can we do to really show the highlights and strengths of worker cooperation, worker ownership, and specifically worker cooperatives. And I want to do a quick reality check. This is really important. This is really talking to people that are not owners. This is the employees or the workers today. Being an owner is no joke. It's responsibility. It's personal time. It's things that you might want to do stuff on your own, but when you're an owner, your business is always in the back of your mind. Also, the mentality around being an owner, it's not just the literally owning something. It's thinking of, this is something that I need to care for always. It's like a dependent. How do you make sure that your business is always growing, always being better? And then you lead by example. That's probably one of the strongest things in doing something like this. The opportunity here, we want to make sure that people join if they want to. No one's forced to join something, and that's really important to have that the autonomy to either you want to join, you don't have to join, but no one should feel compelled like they have to do something. These are for people that want to do it, and that's really the strongest message here. And then lastly, trust and respect. These are the key foundations for doing anything we're doing. If you have trust issues or concerns, with people that you're working with. Work that out before you try and figure out how to build your next step. And I'm not going to go through all the details of the outcomes. We're going to go through this, but the outcome of the series, there are some broad things that will hopefully be able to get you started in the actual series if you complete that series.
Hey, Kirk, we already have a question, and we appreciate the questions that come in on our chat. And the first one comes out from Dean, and his question is, what is the difference between a co-op and an owning equity in the high-tech company?
Okay, really good question. We're going to get to that a little bit, but I'll just really briefly, the difference in like a high-tech where you're owning shares, when you're a co-op member, you own shares of the business, you own basically one share. The real difference with a cooperative is governance and the ability to have governance control, meaning one person, one vote. If you have shares in a company, there's 30 million shares, you might have 1,000 of them. Your voting percentage is about that much, and that's how much you own of the company, about that much. The difference here, when you're a worker co-op, you are an equal owner with all your other owners and members in the cooperative. So your voice is a strong voice. If there's 10 members, you have 10% of the company and 10% of the voice to make those decisions. All right, I'm going to hand this off to John. I'm going to let him introduce himself to you, and then John, go ahead and take over.
Okay, yes, thank you, Kirk, and it's an honor to be here with everyone today. As mentioned, I'm John McNamara with the Northwest Cooperative Development Center. Quick background, I spent about 26 years with Union Cab of Madison, a taxi cab co-op in the Midwest, which when I left had about 250 members. For the last 7 years, I've been working in Olympia, Washington, helping people in the Pacific Northwest create co-ops and convert businesses to worker ownership. And I also have a master's in co-op management and a PhD in business administration from St. Mary's University in Halifax. And today I'll be talking mainly about the foundations of what a co-op is and some specific ways that worker co-ops operate in as a business that may be a little bit different than what most people think of when they think of normal business operations. So starting way at the beginning, cooperation, economic cooperation has really always been part of the human experience. But normally when we talk about cooperation, we're really talking about methods of business organization that came about around the same time as the capitalist business model, and then really extended more deeply as the Industrial Revolution took hold in Northern Hemisphere. So the very first known cooperative under this structure is the Shore Porter Society in Scotland, I believe. It formed as early as 1498. I think there's still some form of them on operation today, but I'm not going to commit to that statement. In the 1750s, Benjamin Franklin formed the first co-op in the United States, which was the Philadelphia Fireman's Insurance Fund, I believe. It's an insurance cooperative. Usually when you see the term mutual in an insurance company's name, that means it's operating on a cooperative basis, not a for-profit basis. So that insurance company still exists today. By the height of the Industrial Revolution in the UK, people like Robert Owen were really dismayed with the dehumanizing nature of work, and they were seeking to find other ways of operating and organizing economics in the country, and this led to a number of experiments, the most successful of which was the Rockdale Pioneers in 1844. They set up a store outside of Manchester, England, and succeeded in keeping the store active, and we'll talk a little bit more about them. Their efforts became what is known today as the Cooperative in the UK, the largest consumer cooperative in the world. In the United States, we also, during our Industrial Revolution, which happened a little bit later, and was tied up also with the ending of slavery during the Civil War, there were a number of efforts to think about the changing nature of work. So the Knights of Labor, one of the first national labor organizations, was very active, not in trying to write contracts with business owners, but rather trying to create worker-owned businesses. And other leaders such as W.B. Du Bois really saw cooperatives as a way for newly freed slaves to gain economic control of their lives and to and to try to build more agency into their world. And that's kind of the very root basics of it. In the 20th century, we really saw a lot of key development in the worker co-op world and in the co-op world as a whole. Mostly the credit union movement picked up under Alphonse Desjardins out of Quebec, and most of the credit unions today follow the Desjardins model. In Canada also, Moses Cody and Thomas Fitzpatrick were two Jesuit priests that helped organize the people in maritime Canada to form various types of cooperatives, worker cooperatives, producer co-ops, credit unions, etc., to build economic control and power. In Spain, very famously, the other Jesuit priests, Erasmin Vianeta, brought together workers in his community to form Mondragon, which were what became Mondragon through a series of industrial co-ops and banks. And then, of course, in this as well in this country, people like Fannie Lou Hamer and the Black community were working to create co-ops such as Freedom Farm and other experiences to gain a bastion of support during Jim Crow and continue that effort to build economic autonomy. One of the bigger moments, of course, came when the publishing of Silent Spring. This led to, in the early 60s, this led to a new environmental movement that also bred what became food co-ops. At the time that the initial food co-ops that we know of today were starting in the late 60s and early 70s, there really wasn't any access to organic or natural foods. Most of it was industrially farmed, and this tied in with a number of other movements happening around that time. The civil rights movement, the anti-war movement, the environmental movement all created a new energy about how to rethink work. And this is where some of our older worker co-ops arose out of. So the Cheese Board Collective in the Bay Area, the Rainbow Grocery in San Francisco, Equal Exchange started out as working with the fair trade movement internationally, in which they help farmer cooperatives in coffee growing regions get a fair price for their beans, and then they are able to use worker co-op to distribute them throughout the United States. Collective Copies and other groups were also looking at the print industry and what everything that goes with that. Union Cab was my cooperative that came out of a bitter labor struggle in the 1970s, and when the owner basically decided to close the doors rather than negotiate, the workers decided that they would just give it a go on their own, and they started their own business as a cooperative. And then the last one I want to mention here is Cooperative Home Care, which started in the 80s and was this rather unique notion that helping people in the Bronx provide in-home care to other people in the Bronx. And at a time when there's very limited support for the healthcare in those communities, this was really a new approach, and it's one that is now spread throughout the country in a number of different ways. This kind of brings us up to the current day. Essentially the United States has been in either a state of war or recession or recovery from recession for the last 20 years. And during this time, it has really stripped the facade of the American dream away from the younger generation coming up. And so we actually see in the co-op, worker co-op movement in the US, it is much younger and much more vibrant than it has been in really decades. This was fostered by, of course, the 2008 crisis, but also the year of the co-op in 2012 with some international focus on the cooperative model. And this really spurred a lot of people on the heels of Occupy to rethink what businesses should be and how they should organize their work. This led to groups like Cooperation Jackson forming, which now have similar models across the country, including Humboldt, California, which just has been going. It's also created a new effort of a number of cities to create economic development programs. So New York and Madison, Wisconsin, I think there's like 25 cities now that are looking at cooperative development in some way as their economic package. And this ties in with the generation of retiring business owners. So right now, roughly, I think 10,000 people a day are retiring. Business owners are very often, only 20% of them have a viable option to sell their business. So the Main Street Employee Ownership Act was passed partially to help support the idea of transitioning existing businesses to worker-owned businesses. This act gives specific mandates to the Small Business Administration and Small Business Development Centers to provide support, and then organizations like ours and Worker to Owner Collaborative and the Democracy Work Institute are also there to provide support for business owners that want to sell to their employees. Coming on the heels of all this, of course, has been the COVID response, and co-ops tend to do actually pretty well because we'll talk a little bit about it later, but because they are not focused on maintaining a profit margin, but meeting the needs of their members, they're able to deal with the response in a way that is more human and more focused on getting through the crisis rather than deciding whether or not to move operations for a better deal. And so hopefully this is the beginning of what we will one day call, or historians will one day refer to as the cooperative century. And by joining us here today, you get to be part of it. We often talk today about the cooperative identity. This goes back to the sets of principles that cooperatives are founded on. I mentioned the Rockdale Pioneers. They, one of their success models is that they were the first organization to actually write down the rules of operation of how they would run the store. And this included things that we know of today, like one member, one vote, making sure that people are economically supporting the store, etc. These principles lasted in some form or another until 1995, when the International Cooperative Alliance, the largest non-governmental organization in the world, representing over 1 billion co-op members across the globe, came together and saw the need to realign the identity in light of the collapse of the planned economies of Eastern Europe. During the Cold War, many governments and organizations misused the word co-op, and so that they weren't really operating under cooperative principles. And so the idea was for the International Co-op Alliance to refocus on that. And we'll dive into that a little bit later. 10 years later, a similar effort was brought to get more clarity around what it means to be a worker co-op. And today there's a big push coming from the credit union movement to redefine concern for community and social responsibility to specifically talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion in our co-op movement, which tends to be somewhat segregated in the US, and I'm thinking of ways to break that. So getting into the international definition, I won't read the whole thing, but it's basically co-ops are there to meet needs of the people who are involved, and to do so in a way that is democratically controlled. So it's the needs may be to generate wealth, but very often there are other social or cultural needs that are also needed to be met. And so we see co-ops in almost every area of the economy, depending on what those needs are. There are a set of values and ethics in addition to the principles. Ultimately, I like to focus on the first two, self-help and self-responsibility. Co-ops are at their heart about people coming together to work with their neighbors and community members to solve their own problems. They do so by acting through these values of solidarity and democracy, and they rely on these values of openness and honesty. And at the root of co-ops from the beginning has always been about caring for others and social responsibility. The principles have been pretty well known in the co-op world for a while. Again, most of these go back to the founding members of Rockdale, but co-ops are open and voluntary for those that will accept the membership responsibilities. Members are expected to support their co-op economically, one member, one vote, focus on education, information, and training, and then working with co-ops to build the co-op movement and also expressing concern for community. The US Department of Agriculture has its own set of ideas about co-ops. These are often referred to as the user principles. Basically speaking, it means that the people who use the co-op services or goods are the owners. The users also control the co-op, and the users are ultimately the benefit of the people who benefit from the co-op. In the case of a worker co-op, that means the users are the people who have the jobs that the co-op provides, and the employees then are the ones who control the co-op and that ultimately it's the workers who benefit not only through wages, but through safe equipment, and then ultimately, if there is a surplus at the end of the year, through a distribution of earnings. So these are what are basically known as the user principles, and kind of a core focus of how the US government basically looks at cooperatives. Worker co-ops specifically, and this kind of gets into that World Declaration, they're basically seen as a place to create meaningful work based on human dignity. Again, free and voluntary membership. There are some communities where, because there are tax benefits for worker co-ops, or people might be forced into joining a co-op, even if they don't really want to, because it's controlled maybe by a small cartel. But also that the majority of workers are members. And so this means 51% of the people who work in a business should be basically the owners of the business. And likewise, the owners of the business should be a majority of workers. So there's some co-ops, we call them solidarity co-ops, where maybe a grocery store is owned by both consumers and workers. That probably wouldn't be a worker co-op, even though the workers have membership rights, because the consumer members may vastly outnumber the workers in terms of voting power. And then finally, they should be autonomous and independent of the state. And then finally, again, also democratically controlled management, which doesn't mean that every decision gets decided on a vote, but that there's a process for representative democracy, and sometimes there is also direct democracy. Real quickly, there's something called the co-op advantage. Co-ops tend to do well in market failures. In the 2008 downturn, for instance, the co-ops of Spain and Italy actually grew and expanded and added more jobs. They also tend to build solidarity in their communities and provide a means for human development. People come to a co-op, maybe doing the basic entry job, but they might develop new skills and go and even become, as they get involved with the board and committees and other aspects, become better, more engaged citizens in their community, joining city committees, even running for public office. And but ultimately it allows people to overcome unfavorable power dynamics. So Union Cab, I literally saw people who came to us who were houseless, who had nothing, and they were able to really get control of their lives and prosper because they were working in a place that valued humans over dollars. I want to use there's some language that gets involved in worker ownership. So ESOP, co-op, and collective. An ESOP is an employee stock ownership program. It's basically a retirement plan. It can sit on top of other types of corporations like S Corps and C Corps and stuff. Usually the voting power is held by a trustee, not the shareholder. And it also operates in one share, one vote. So workers may or may not have a voice in operations. So for instance, I know a grocery store that's an ESOP, and the CEO of the store, who's an employee, as the manager, owns 51% of the shares. So basically, he gets to decide what everybody does. Everyone else is sort of along for the ride. It may be a nice ride, but it's still, they don't really have a lot of voting power. The collective, pretty much the voting power is in the member. And most times, the collective members control all aspects. They might meet and make decisions for the week. This works best in small organizations. And then in the middle are the co-ops, which technically, legally, in most states are C corporations. The voting power is one member, one vote. Workers generally have a voice in operations, but depending on how the co-op organizes itself, that might be limited, but they always control the board of directors. Usually, the board of directors consists entirely of non-managerial workers who then hire, and we'll get into more of that in a second here. So worker co-ops tend to use three different basic ways of organizing. A traditional hierarchy, which uses majority voting, a collective, which tends to use consensus decision-making, and one that's gaining prominence now called sociocracy or dynamic governance that uses autonomous work circles and consent in the process. I'm just going to go through these real quick. So hierarchy is just what every other business looks like. You have a big boss that hires subordinate managers that tell the workers what to do and control their work. Usually in a worker co-op, then on top of the big boss is a board of directors that's made up of the workers. So it's a little bit circular. And if the big boss isn't doing the job, the workers can fire them and bring in someone new. And And so it's pretty much looks like any other business would look from the outside. The only difference is that the people who are on the board are the frontline employees for you. Collectives, I mentioned, the attendees consensus. Workers are engaged in pretty much all the decisions unless they form a committee or delegate to a single person. Really best for organizations under 30. And as you get bigger, you may have to create some different structures. Dynamic governance, we often use a term hierarchy of work as opposed to power. So the structure is set up by what you're doing. As long as your department isn't doing something that affects another department, that department gets to make their decisions. The circles tend to be double linked. So you have the general circle in this case, in that picture would promote a department leader, and then the department circle would create a representative back to the general circle. Basically, they work along the decision process with the philosophy of things should be safe enough to try, good enough for now. And that's what brings you to consent. Usually there's review dates on most decisions so that you go back. So it's like doing a real experiment where you create a hypothesis, you implement the experiment, and then you review to see whether or not it succeeded. And so those are kind of basically the three rough ways. There are, of course, a number of different ways of doing things. I'd like to say there's no right way to co-op. One of the newer models is called the union co-op model, which kind of harkens back to the Knights labor. Usually this is kind of a basic one, but I've seen some different models where the workers who are the owners, they elect a board of directors who hires a manager who runs operations, but they also elect a union committee that negotiates with the manager on compensation and working conditions. So a lot of the policies that board of directors might do in a more traditional worker co-op is actually going to get done through contract negotiation. In this model, we're looking at the Communication Workers of America, but part of the benefits of joining with the labor union is, one, you have support for that sort of discussion around compensation and working conditions. They bring in market, information. Also, very often unions have access to other benefits. And more importantly, if you're in an industry that's heavily regulated, the union provides access to support lobbying at the state and federal level to make changes and actually to increase benefits for workers industry-wide that then help the co-op as well. I would like to throw union cabs model in. We were very hierarchical into 2012, in which we took discipline away from management and created a peer review structure that handled all of the discipline for the office, for the organization. This is 250 people, remember. Management became a team management with a number of circles, I guess we could call them. And then the board of directors had its committee structure. In the center of all this is the policy code, and really kind of remember what Melissa Hoover from Democracy at Work Institute said, that at some point in a worker co-op, the policy manual becomes the boss. So regardless of what structure you create, at some point the boss in a worker co-op is the policy code that everyone has agreed to enact and follow. And so real quickly, just about the money, the course itself will get much deeper into this, but I want to say co-ops are at-cost organizations. They are not nonprofits. They're not a charity. There has to be a viable economic model. If your business is based on getting grants and donations, it's not going to work as a co-op. They're also not for-profit. Again, going back to that definition, the purpose of the organization is to meet the needs of the members, which might be safe equipment to use. It might be health plans. It might be a number of things that aren't going to help you get profit, but that's what they're for. At cost also doesn't mean break even. You still need to cover your wages, your capital equipment, replacing capital equipment, and you might need a rainy day fund. And also co-ops will retain equity for these purposes. And so I do want, because sometimes profit sharing and patronage refund get mixed in there. So profit sharing is when a business shares part of the profit with the workers as wages or bonuses. The difference between this and a patronage refund is profit sharing is taxed as wages. Patronage refund is an equity distribution. So when you get a patronage refund from a co-op, which is a share of the profit, it comes to you not as wages, but as part of a return on your investment. So You know, and again, you know, decisions are one member, one vote, but the distribution is percent input versus percent output. So if you work 2% of the hours in a business, you're going to get 2% of whatever patronage refund is there. And so it gets a little bit more complicated than this, but basically speaking, co-ops are able to put their profits, distribute them out to the members so they aren't taxed at the corporate rate, but then people have that equity that they're taxed only as regular income, not there aren't any other payroll taxes applied to it. Some examples of co-ops, Working Systems is a union co-op in Olympia, Washington that's represented by CWA. They provide software for labor unions. Capital Home Care is a home care cooperative also in Washington that provides in-home care to seniors. Arizmendi is a network of cooperatives in the Bay Area. And they also have a special co-op that just helps design and support the other co-ops. So it's an example of what we call a federated or a cooperative model. We mentioned grocery, Rainbow Grocery, which is a very large worker-owned cooperative in the San Francisco, I think, Mission District. And then the last one is a new conversion, which Working Systems also was, but we'll let Kirk talk about a slice of New York. And I think before we get into that, we are going to ask you to do a code. So we want you to go to menti.com. I think they're going to put this in the chat, right?
It is in chat right now. So you can click on that link right now to go to that. Yeah, thank you.
And then enter that number. And we want you to tell us which co-op principle resonates the most with you. And then I'm going to turn it over to Kirk. We're going forward. Thank you so much for this time.
All right. So I am going to, yeah, if you can, so this is the kind of interactive part to see who's paying attention, see who's still online, see who's not doing email, and to get you engaged here. This was your homework that you should have gotten. If you go to menti.com, MENTI.com, and type in the number that was up here. Oh, look at that. People are already starting to go. 9 people has gone. So this is, we have about 31 people on here. I should see at least 25 to 30 people, 25 people hitting those little bubbles and getting them in there. So we're just going to let this kind of build in real time right now. Just take a minute, go to menti.com and enter that code 10922084, or go to the chat and click on that link right there, and it'll go right to that. So just take a minute. These are the core principles. These are like the foundational elements of every worker cooperative. I guess every cooperative, but at the worker cooperative, it's really important to see which one of these resonates the most. And it looks like autonomy and independence is coming. Look at that. Here we go. We got about 15 people, 16 people, membership, member economic participation. So this is great. Autonomy seems to be winning and pulling into the lead. We're almost at 20. When we hit 20, we will continue on. But this is our test of engagement right now. So
Hey,
come
Kirk,
on, one more. Yeah.
Hey, Kirk, just one quick question that came up in the chat was the difference between real estate co-ops and renters. Maybe kind of do a quick kind of summary as people are voting here on co-ops for home ownership and that sort of thing.
So yeah, I will. I think I'm going to pass that off to John. John, maybe give a 20-second response to that. If not, we can hold that to the end.
Sure. So actually, one of the things we do at the Northwest Co-op Development Center is we work with manufactured home parks. So this is where somebody owns their home, but they don't own the land underneath it. We work with them to buy the park, and then the co-op is the park, and they pay rent to themselves. It would be similar in a building. So if you have a building, or in Madison, they actually have Madison Community Co-ops has, I think, 20 different buildings spread throughout the city, each of which are maybe quads or maybe have more apartments in them. The person doesn't own their apartment per se, but they're a member of the co-op and they pay rent to the co-op. And then they have a say about things and dealing with property management and the like. You could have, there are a lot of different types of co-ops. So there's full market co-ops, which are the ones in New York City most people hear about. And those are where people do get the equity value of the time that they have the apartment owned, and when they leave, they get to get that equity with them. Then there are like the resident-owned communities we work with are limited equity co-ops where people are very limited in how much equity they can take with them when they go. It kind of runs a continuum between no equity and full equity markets. It kind of depends again what the different group wants. The Rocks are really focused on affordable housing, and so that's where you're going to see that co-op model work. The ones in New York are not as focused on that one.
All right, thank you, John. And we're going to jump in. Just wanted to ask real quick, the Democratic member control. I want to come back to that person at some point. That's you're the lone soldier right there. So I'd like to see who that is. Is that you, Grant? Did you do that one?
No, I didn't do that. Cooperation, cooperatives. Yeah.
I did the cooperation among cooperatives as well. But I will jump into our session here. Thank you for indulging us in that little dialogue. It shows where people's interests are, and so thank you for that. So so my purpose today is to share a little bit about the transition we went through. Again, hopefully you got a good idea of what co-ops are all about to start with. But why I get this question a lot. Why did you convert? Like, I've heard, why did you give your business away? Which a transition is not a gift, it is a sale. And I would suggest, is that the right question? Why did you convert? Some of the questions I think would be that I would want you to think about are, why are you selling your business? What goals do you have? Do you want to retire? Do you need money? Do you want to, scale back your operation? Those are the things that will drive whether or not you're ready to exit the business. And if you are, then the cooperatives model is something you should consider. So, I think the why did you convert is a second question, is like a follow-up question to the first question. And the primary question is, why are you looking to do something? Like, we did this not so that we could so we could sell or get out of the business. We did this because we wanted to provide a platform for our team and to drive social change. That's not why you should consider it necessarily. That is just why we did. So that's why we did it isn't necessarily what you should start with. But I'm happy to go into details on that. I just don't know if that's helpful for you. What John talked about at one point is the Main Street Employee Ownership Act. And I just want to spend just a minute on this because I think it's really important to understand what that really means. The federal government has basically sanctioned and validated and supported the concept of cooperatives. And they've directed this act directed the SBA to start educating and being and training and supporting the idea of worker ownership and employee ownership. Now, unfortunately, they didn't get any funding for that. That's life. But they did get the mission to do it, and whether they do it or not is a separate thing. But they did get the mission to do this. So what that means is, don't think, are these cooperatives real? Like, our worker cooperatives, when you hear about them, is that real? Like, can you really have like equal people and 10 people that own the company? Does that even make sense? Just take our word for it here. It's valid. The government has sanctioned it. It's happened globally, and so don't get distracted on whether or not the financial model is real or not. It is real. Go to the next step, which is, does it apply to me and does it apply to our situation? So it's important to think about, like, as an owner, what's really different? Well, functionally as a business, there isn't a lot of difference in terms of how you operate on a day-to-day basis. You still have managers, you still have, we're profit-based, we're a competitive business. We are in Silicon Valley right here. We compete with other people. We believe we're a best-in-class business, but we compete at that level with everyone. And we're trying to generate as much revenue and profits for our business as possible. The only difference is where those profits go once they're made. And if you think about an owner, typically all the money is controlled by the owner, and the owner decides how it gets distributed, other than a wage and a salary, and that's what's agreed upon ahead of time when people work. And as John was talking about before, the way profits are distributed, and there's a term, profit and surplus. I don't want to get technical. I just think of the excess money in the business is is basically available to the people that are working there. So the business takes care of those people with that extra money, with the profits in the business. The difference is if you work 10 hours and I work 20 hours, I have twice as much profit access than you do. That's the basic concept here, is the more you work, the more profit access you have. And if you're a member, you have by right access, meaning it's not discretionary. You actually have that right. That's your money to make decisions on. Doesn't mean you're going to take it, but you have the right to decide how it's spent. The people that are not members in your business, in our case, they don't have rights to it, but in our case, we actually distribute to them as well. So they earn patronage just like every other member does, an owner. When you hear the term member, owner, same thing. Owner, member, same thing. Oh, there we go. Member equals owner. I knew I wanted to say that. So in our case, our organization specifically, I list culture up here because it's the critical thing for you to think about. At least for us, it was the most important thing. Our culture is one of empowerment and one of autonomy, but also team spirit. So when we started looking at what co-ops did and how they operated, we saw that it aligned very well with members, the concept of members and owners. So we already had an empowered workforce, and that's really what we wanted to focus on. In our environment, we have specific thresholds, so not all employees qualify. And by the way, the stuff that we're putting on here, I'm going to go through some of it pretty quickly. I'm taking a little bit more time on others. It's all going to be available to you afterwards if you want to look at details on some of that. So you don't have to take notes if you don't want to. Not everybody qualifies. For example, we require full-time employees to qualify to be part of the co-op. Now, we define full-time as 25 hours a week. That's not like 35, 40 hours a week, but for our threshold to meet, we don't want this to be a barrier, but we want to have 25 hours a week of somebody's time so they can make informed business decisions. If you work 25 hours a week with us, you know enough about our business to make informed decisions. As John mentioned, we have members. If you think of the members as like the citizens of the business, the co-op is kind of like its own little country. It's its own sovereign nation. And in that you have citizens, which are the members. They vote for the board, which is kind of like the government, the city council, or the government that takes actions on behalf of that. The board hires the general manager. In this case, it's me, and I'm at the will of the board. So the board can terminate me at any time. And I can't, as a general manager, take anybody's membership away. I can only deal with operational things. The board creates the policies. So for example, committees and things like that. In our case, we have 4 committees. We have the Culture and Accountability Committee. We have the Finance and Employee Benefits Committee. We have an Innovation Committee, and we have a Health and Safety Committee. All of those committees do the work that then reports to the board. They don't have decisions. They can't implement policy, but that basically the members do, and we have members and non-members on those committees. So we have basically a blend of our employees working together on various parts of our business. And then what happens is those committees then makes recommendations to the board, and then the board implements policy. And then as a general manager, I enforce the policy, but I take direction from the board. Profits, and again, I mentioned in our case, profits get distributed to all employees, not just the members of the co-op. In our business right now, we're at about 25 people. We have I think 13 members, but not all of the 25 people in our business qualify to meet that threshold. They're not permanent 25 hours a week. So if you're 1 day a week or 2 days a week, you don't qualify to be a member. You can't actually apply to be a member. Of the people that qualify to be members, we're at about 85% of those people are members of our co-op, or 85 to 90, because we just got 1 or 2 that might be joining in the next month or so. But we made the decision as a business, as an organization, that all of those profits and excess money in the company will get distributed to all people in the organization, whether you're a member or not. Now, that is our choice. You don't have to do. The only thing you have to do is the owners or the members, they have rights to that money, but the other people don't have to. We thought that was the most equitable thing to do, and we wanted to do that as a practice. So the members are kind of stewards of of the organization and the approach that we take to do business, and we think everybody needs to be treated fairly and equitably. If you're putting in work, whether you're a member or not, you're going to get rewarded for the profits that you helped generate. And then lastly, again, this was kind of our thing, is this, we are the stewards of the business. So I'm going to take a break from that. I just wanted to see how many people are on camera. I'm seeing a couple. Just wanted to wave. Did you? Hello. Thanks for tuning in. I wanted to just have this more as a dialogue rather than a whole bunch of slides. And then if there's something that comes up, like I said, you can raise your hand and jump to the front if it's really important. If I'm going in a direction that's something that you want to dive a little deeper on. If not, we will have Q&A at the end of this. But I want to walk you through a couple things about our transition over the next 10 or 15 minutes. I'm just going to take the time just to tell you a little bit about our transition. I have slides on the process that we went through, which I will share with you. But I just want to take a minute, just kind of walk you through our process. So when we first started this, we drove this, my wife and I, Marguerite, we drove this as something we wanted to do. It's important to know that while co-ops, I think personally, are good for the economy, I think they're good for the country, I think they're good for communities, I think they provide social justice, I think it provides a voice to people that typically don't have a voice and gives them ownership opportunities that they never have. All that's interesting information, but irrelevant when you're talking to someone who's trying to sell their business. And so I never lead with that. That's just a kind of a secondary thing. That's like an added, the icing on the cake kind of thing. But the real meat and potatoes is, does this make sense for me to sell my business to my employees? Why would I do that? Why don't I just sell it on the open market and go for it? And that's really what the decision process, in our process that we went through, we wanted to drive this because we wanted to give our team a platform. But that is not what anybody has to do. It is a valid and sound financial decision and model, and you will get a return on your investment if you're selling it. In our case, in our process, we went through, we had a business development team of about, I think it was 13 or 14 people that met weekly for about 4 or 5 months. And then we decided through this committee, Erin, one of our team members, she did some research to find out that cooperatives seemed to align well with what we did and how we operated. So we looked at that. We looked at ESOPs too, but that had a lot of regulation and some overhead and SEC. You have to file stuff because you have to value the company every year. It seemed like a lot of overhead for us. But when we looked at worker cooperatives, it tended to align directly with what our business values were: employee empowerment, being able to be thoughtful about how people have a voice, giving people that platform to basically voice. And frankly, they're doing the work already. This rewards that behavior. So we went through this process. And we connected with the Democracy at Work Institute, which is headquartered in Oakland, California, which is just north of us. We took a trip up there, talked to one of their attorneys. They put us in touch with Arizmendi, probably one of the best cooperative models on the planet. And we met with Tim up there, who walked us through what they did and how they approach things. And then we got connected with a company called Project Equity, which is a technical assistance provider that helps businesses transition from private ownership to worker cooperatives. And you might be saying, well, why can't we do that? And the answer is you can. You can absolutely do that. And I've encouraged that for the last 3 years. We've been a co-op now for 3.5 years, it'll be 4 years in July. And having that technical assistance helped us transition. And the process that they go through in that is proven, It's been done multiple times with multiple organizations. They're local here, they're national as well. So and other companies like John's company helps people transition. So you might be asking, so what are we doing here with this? We're just taking a different approach. We're trying to compress that time and give you a more tactical, more, kind of almost like the cheat sheet of how do you get this done quickly for people that want to do this. And the catch is, this isn't something that you just kind of sit in and kind of passively participate in. This is more of you need to be engaged, because if you want to take the shortcut, you need to put the work in, and you can do that, but it takes time and energy and focused energy. So when we did this, it took us almost 14 months and it cost us almost $45,000 to do that. And we paid for that. Now, not all conversions cost that much. It cost us that much because we documented everything we did. And we did so knowing that we would then provide that baseline information to anybody that wanted that. So our operating agreement, our decision matrix, our committees, all the legal documents that we have those available for people if they want to use them to get them like 85% of the way there, 90% of the way there. And then you can tweak what you want to do after that. And I think that's important to kind of give you a head start in getting some of this stuff done. But that 14-month period that we went through, we learned about financials, we learned about governance, we learned about how to set up the books and how to read a profit and loss. And most people in our organization have never done that before. And I will be really candid with you. The first 6 months that we were going through this, people would ask me what we're doing. I didn't even know. Like, I didn't know what we were doing. I flat out could not explain it very well. I just knew that it had been done successfully, that that their values are consistent with ours. And it's something where that I felt comfortable that I just got to kind of have a little bit of faith that this is going to work out. Just keep plowing forward. And after about 6 months, then I can start talking about it. And I wanted to share one story that I would consider my light bulb moment. My light bulb moment was sitting at a project equity. We were at a part of a cohort, which was us and 3 other companies that were looking to transition. Ultimately, 2 of us transitioned together. It was Niles Pie up in the East Bay, and us transitioned at the same time. But at the time, there were 4 different organizations, about 20 of us in the room. I'm filming it for remote, so this is before Zoom and all that. I was just filming it so I could take it back to our team. And I'm sitting there, and Arizmendi came in. They were the guest speaker at the time. He had no idea who we were. We were just 20 strangers sitting in a room. And the first thing he put, and I'm filming this on top of this. He throws up his financials on the screen, all his books, profit and loss, all his, his ledger accounts, where the profit centers are, what his costs are, what his invoices are, where his revenue is, capital accounts for all the workers that are there. And I started looking at it, I'm like, holy crap, I'm not even sure I'm comfortable looking at that information, much less sharing that level of information, much less sharing that level of our stuff with our team. And I started thinking, like, this guy, and this is a $6 million bakery. I mean, this is a $6 million operation that he's sharing all of the detail, all the sensitive stuff that we have been told never share with anybody because they're the protected secrets. And when I saw him do that, I was like, why am I so uncomfortable about seeing that? Like, what makes that so bad or so taboo? And what came back to me, and we've all been very transparent about our operations, our books. We share our information with our people. We share costs and where our profits and how we get to where we are and where our salaries are. Everybody's salaries are open and transparent. Everybody knows what everybody makes. But when I saw this, there were things that I was not comfortable. And I started thinking about, why am I not comfortable with that? And I couldn't think of a reason. I couldn't think of a reason other than I was just taught that. Like, that's just what I was, that's what I learned. And the only thing that would cause hesitation is if you're doing something that's not quite right, or you're doing something that if people knew about it, they wouldn't like. And the reality is some people make more than others. Some people have more responsibility and get paid more. And some people don't. And owners have a lot of responsibility. They've taken a lot of risk, and they've invested their own money and livelihood into this. And they should get compensated more for that as owners. And that's where, so it doesn't mean that everybody should, this much for everybody and I get that much. It's, where does that money go? And the reality, in my case, in looking at this, if the information that you're presenting and the way you're running your business is fair and equitable, there's nothing to shelter. There's no reason for that. And by sharing that information, you empower everybody with the knowledge of how the business can work. Now, not everybody's interested. We have, there are folks that are just not interested in those kinds of things, and that's fine. But the people that are interested, those are the ones you want to try, you want to try and cultivate in your team to see if they want to take that step with you and take on that leadership role.
Hey, Kirk, an interesting question that came up on the chat is how co-ops choose their members. John put something in the chat in regards to that making a certain threshold of hours and that sort of thing. But maybe, expand a little bit on that, on how you have this business, now you have people that are interested, that next step.
Yeah. So let me do this. Let me bring up my presentation here one more time. And let me go to, I already went through this. So I went through that. So this next kind of, this might get to what you're asking about. I'll come back to this in a second. So member requirements. So in our case, we have minimum threshold. You have to be with us, two main requirements: minimum of a year. You have to be with us a year, and 1,200 hours. So you can't work like 1 day a month for a year and qualify. You have to work at least 1,200 hours, which is about 25 hours a week for a year. That's about, it's maybe a little bit less, but it's roughly that. You have to be on schedule for that. So if you meet those thresholds, then you can actually apply. It doesn't mean you're going to get accepted, but you can apply. You have to understand that you're going to commit $3,000 to your membership, $750 deposit, and then the rest we have over a 2-year payroll deduction. So it's not designed, we're not trying to create a barrier for anybody in our case. We're trying to create it so that there's value and the membership is valued. So it's not just a throwaway. We do create a 2-year commitment in our case. So for example, if you wanted to join the co-op, you accepted, and after a year you said, you know what, this sucks, I'm out of here. You can leave, but just understand that you didn't meet your 2-year commitment. That $750 deposit stays in the business. The rest of your membership will be refunded and given back to you. That's how co-ops work. But that initial $750 deposit that started off, that is kept in the co-op because that was a commitment that was not met, that you made, and so the co-op is going to keep that because you've already been a part of that.
And Kirk, another question that came up on the chat is, how do you set that fee?
So we originally, it's a good question. So let me just round out the last. So,
yep.
So how do you get in? You have to get, in our case, you have to get voted in. And this is true with any co-op. You have to get voted in by the other members, kind of like a club, I guess. In our case, we have a threshold of a supermajority of 75%. So 75% of the members need to support you joining the co-op before you do, because once you're a co-op member, everybody's equal. So whether you've been with a co-op 3 days or 3 years, your voting rights are the same. Your ability to do anything the same. You can run for a board immediately. So everybody's considered equal in that. And I'm sorry, Neil, what was that last one?
The question was, how is that membership fee set? So you have $750 as the deposit, $3,000 total. Where did that number come from?
So we were originally starting at a higher number, like we were around 6,000 or 6,500, because we really want only the serious people to enter into this field. And we decided to reduce that. We want to make it significant in the sense that so fees do two things. They put capital into the business, so there's money, you can spend that money. It's discretionary to the business. It's a liability because you owe it back to the the worker, to the employee, but it's yours to spend as a business if you want to buy a piece of equipment or whatever. So it can be used as a way to get cash into the business membership. But we wanted to make it so that it's valued. We saw this as, what's the cost of a decent used car? Like, people value cars. Like, we try to say something tangible, like what can people relate to? And you might spend between $2,000 and $3,000 on a used car if you're just like kind of like a beater car if you're going to work or whatever. But it's still, that's money, and that's really where we came up. It's like, what is a Rainbow? I think charges I think it's $1 or $10. It's kind of just a honorary thing. It's kind of like a token. We wanted this to be more substantial, so that's where this came from. So I'll get back. Let me just close out one last thing on the transparency element. So in going through learning about the finances, we do something. It turns out what we ended up doing is something called open book management. Open book management means you just share the financials and your business details with your team, and everybody on the team, whether they're a member or not, all our financials are on a Google Drive, secured obviously, and they have access to that, read access to all of those things. They can participate in our committees. They can participate in any of our board meetings if they want to. Most people don't, but that is something that can be it's discretionary to them, but it's available to everyone. We share numbers. We have a company meeting next week. We're going to be sharing that. Some highlights through COVID, what we did, and how we kind of navigated that, and financially what the results were. But I guess one thing I didn't plan on talking about, but since let me just break out of this for a second. One of the things that we did that I think might have been different, although I'd like to think we would have done it the same way, was when COVID started. We stopped our indoor dining March 8th of last year. We just proactively did that. We weren't asked to do that. We just started doing that. We required masks of our team on the 31st, our customers on April 20th. And we shut our front door in our Santa Clara location on the 24th. We did a lot of proactive things to focus on protecting our team. And we did this prior to county direction or before being told or anything. And it wasn't because, like, we stopped selling slices on March 20 on a Saturday afternoon because we had 2 people resign that morning because they were so freaked out because of customers in the shop. And so in talking to the 2 of them, I asked, so what can we do better? How can we make you more comfortable in here? Not that they were going to come back. And the biggest thing was being around customers, knowing that this virus is out here, and they were all freaked out about it. And I mean, they were prone for anxieties anyways, but this really pushed them over the edge. So what we did that afternoon, I went in and I locked the door. So this is where governance and operations are very different. So as a general manager, I have operational control of the business. I don't have to. It's not by consensus. You can do that, but we don't. It's not by consensus. It's not like I have to talk to anybody to implement something at the shop or make a decision that's on behalf of the shop's benefit, whether it's safety or security or anything like that. I can do that. This is one of those times. I kept everybody informed in this, but this was not more of a debate. This is more like, we need to do this to protect our team and to keep each other safe and healthy and be comfortable coming to work. And so in doing so, we shut down our slice operation. We're a slice in New York, for God's sake, and we stopped selling slices on March 24th. Right, that was about 35 to 40% of our business was slices. So 40% of our revenue was in slices, and I made the decision to turn that off for the safety of the team, knowing that we would take it in the shorts with money. It was happening anyways, but this accelerated that, and it was really rough. But the team understood that the reason we did that was because we were focusing on how do we protect our team. That was the priority. It wasn't how do we extract the most from our customers or how we squeeze everything out of our team. It's how do we take care of our team first? And that became so that's my job, that's my only job, is to make sure we take care of our team. And in the past, it's like you take care of your team, the team takes care of the business, and the profits work out themselves. Like that's always been my motto and my thing. But now I'm tasked with how do we protect our team. So everything I do is transparent. Even if I have the authority to do it without the team, I still engage the team. Another example of kind of how the governance works. I went to the board, I was working in August last year together, and most of the team was broken. Like I'm limping. One of the guys has a hurt wrist. One of the guys has a bad knee or a bad leg. Another one has a bad wrist. And I'm looking around 4 of the 6 guys I'm working with are damaged, and one is just exhausted. So I went to the board and said, guys, we need to do something proactively. Our team, we've been nonstop since this started. And how could we need to take a week off, like literally close both shops, paid vacation, because people are working when they're not feeling well. Like they're making health decisions just because they got to pay their bills. Like they are sacrificing their personal well-being. So we made the decision that we would close our business for a full week, both shops, not half and half, both shops. And we figured it would be a $25,000 to $30,000 hit to do that. And that would come out of our business, and we would pay everybody so that people didn't have to worry about bills. And we did that. It ended up costing us closer to $45,000 because we lost some customers. You're closed for a week, you lose business. And it took a while for us to come back on that. So it was a big hit, but that was something that I didn't make that decision on my own. I suggested that to the board reviewed it, and we agreed collectively, unanimously, to give everyone a mandatory paid week off. And we did that. So that's a difference between me shutting the front door in our Santa Clara location, stopping slices. That's an operational decision. That's not required any decision. I made that decision. I informed everybody, got buy-in, but that was going to happen whether they bought in or not. Versus let's close for a week, and we should do this to protect our team and invest in our team. And that is a decision, because that's using profits, that's using company money to pay for that. And so they agreed to that. So I'm coming up on time right now, so I want to be respectful of Grant because I'm about to hand off to Grant. But the biggest, I guess, takeaway from mine before we go to, we'll go to Q&A at the end, but ownership's hard, transparency is critical, and empowering your team is critical in a cooperative environment. Work out your differences openly, and don't think that, give someone the benefit of the doubt. Trust that people are acting in good faith when you're going through this process. And, if you see something you don't like, become an owner and then change what you don't like. Be the change. Like that's, I guess that's, been said by a lot of people. But all right, I'm going to jump back into this, and I'm going to give me just 1 second here. I will share this. This is my last thing, and then Grant, I'm gonna pass off. So there are some challenges. I don't want you to think this is all rosy and we figured everything out and it's a home run every time. It takes time and effort and money to convert, which is what this series is trying to address, some of those challenges. But there's a lack of awareness. And there are some things that are not addressed, which we can get into in the future. Should you be interested in taking a next step, going a little bit deeper, that you'll have to deal with. But again, we can go into that later. So I will now turn this over to Grant, and Grant has been a partner on this, a thought partner on this series from the beginning, and we've participated together. So go ahead, Grant.
Thank you, Kirk. I'm just going to share my screen really quickly. Everybody see it? Good.
Yep.
All right. So have gone over cooperatives, what they are, history of the cooperatives. We've also discussed the conversion process. And I want to discuss, if you're working in the public sector, if you're working in economic development, if you're working on policy, why would you support worker cooperatives? I think you get some of that from what we've presented so far, but I wanted to focus a little bit from that vantage point.
Grant, go ahead and put yourself in presentation mode.
Sorry about that.
That's all right.
So I want to think about the current context that we find ourselves in. There's some long-term trends that need to be addressed, and something that if you work in economic development, you're aware of. decades-long median stagnation in wages, the preponderance of poor quality jobs, especially since the early 1990s, large and growing inequality, the prioritization both here in the US and then globally for footloose capital, so money that can leave communities very easily. And then of course, there's the issue of retiring business owners. They don't have anybody to sell the business to. So there's a lot of these long-term trends. And then of course, COVID and the economic fallout has exacerbated that and made a lot of these things even worse. So some of the issues, they arise from policy. They arise from what the local government, state government, and the federal government is doing. They sometimes arise from market forces, the interaction, the complex interactions of small businesses, medium business, and large businesses competing with one another, and then consumers bidding for services on the market. They also emerge from the structure of the economy, but they also emerge at the enterprise level within enterprises. So one of the reasons why you see increase in inequality is because inequality within enterprises has been increasing. The AFL-CIO, they keep track of the so-called CEO to worker pay ratio, and then particularly in large corporations. And what they show is that there's inequality increasing within businesses, especially large businesses. And so how a business will share the surplus that it generates will also lead to whether or not you have equitable or inequitable outcomes. The same thing is true if who owns the business. So if you are a worker and you work at an enterprise and you're in a worker-owned enterprise, you own the business. If you're any other type of private business, you can't allow for absentee ownership. Absentee ownership is you're literally absent from the operations of the business. So you can own a business in China and live in California. When the profits are made in that company in China, they come back to California. That sets in motion problems as well. So if you work in economic development and you want to support equitable and place-based economic development, if you want to support development that widens business ownership, that keeps money flowing in the local economy and tends to pay higher wages, worker cooperatives are really an important tool for that. They're not a magic solution. They are not going to solve all of our problems. There's certainly a solution that's not often addressed. And I think it's important to note also that whenever you have a given set of economic policies or a given economic context, not every enterprise form or business type is going to respond equally to that context or those policies. Worker cooperatives will respond differently than chain stores, for example, to any given set of policies. So the economic policies that we want to foster, the development we want to foster in our communities, the enterprise forms are going to respond differently to those policies, and also they're going to have different economic outcomes. So as far as worker cooperatives, how are they different? We've covered a lot of this already, but from an economic development perspective, worker cooperatives do widen business ownership. If you work at a cooperative, you're going to own the worker cooperative, and that widens business ownership. So if you want to support widening business ownership in your community, worker cooperatives are a very important institution. This is particularly important, the second here, which is allow people to pool resources and risk. This is important for low-income people. If you want to foster economic development, endogenous economic development within low-income communities, many times they don't have enough money on the individual level to start a business. But if they can pool their money and their resources with other workers, they can collectively do things that is not going to be possible at the individual level. It also allows them to share risk. So if you work at a worker cooperative, you're sharing risk, you're not taking on the risk yourself. And they also have different internal incentives. And this, more than anything, I'm referring to the sharing of information. If I work for a private company and I figure out a way to be more efficient, I can make money for that company, but I might not share that information with my coworkers because I'm competing with those coworkers for promotion, for higher wages. If I work in a cooperative, I would benefit from my coworkers knowing how to be more efficient because we can collectively be more we can generate a larger surplus within the cooperative, which then can come back to us. So I benefit from other people knowing how to be more efficient. So worker cooperatives, because of the ownership structure, they do incentivize the sharing of information in ways that other private companies don't necessarily, at least not to the same extent. They're also internally democratic, which we can talk about if you're interested. They're enterprises without absentee ownership. And by this, I mean, again, owners that are absent from the operations. If you have workers that are going to be living close to the business necessarily, and you could say with worker cooperatives that's necessarily the case, you can't necessarily say that's the case of any other enterprise form, then you're going to keep money and business in the local economy necessarily. And they're also internally equitable. There are, of course, challenges that worker cooperatives face. There's a general lack of knowledge about cooperatives. And so, as I'm going to talk about in a few minutes, a lot of governments that are trying to support worker cooperatives, they focus on this. When it comes to education, they're not only educating the general public, they're educating their own people in the public sector. So they're educating people that work in, say, economic development departments or planning departments about what worker cooperatives are, or what cooperatives are more broadly, and how to deal with them. In some other countries like Italy that have a very large worker cooperative sector, they actually have in banks, they have branches that are just devoted to worker-owned cooperatives. And so when there is a general lack of knowledge about cooperatives, and governments that are trying to support worker cooperatives do focus on educating the population about cooperatives and worker cooperatives in particular. There are also legal issues. So in response to COVID and the economic fallout, governments are trying to help small businesses, but if you look at how they define which businesses are eligible for that aid, a lot of times they've been excluding worker-owned companies. And so a lot of people, Kirk among them, have been working on trying to redefine who qualifies for that aid. So that it includes worker-owned cooperatives, but there are those types of issues that arise, and that is connected to the lack of knowledge about worker cooperatives. I'm from the state of Illinois, and a few years ago, it was actually illegal at the state level to operate worker-owned cooperatives in particular markets. So at the state level, politicians had to push for there to be a change to worker cooperative laws so that worker cooperatives can even operate in particular markets. And at the federal level, until recently, the Small Business Administration it was difficult to give things like SBA 7A loans to worker cooperatives because of the way that things were structured. There was a law that was passed a few years ago that changed that, but still that was a barrier that existed until very recently. So there's a number of legal issues and legal ambiguities that can sometimes cause problems. There's often limited technical support. Governments that are supporting worker cooperatives do focus on providing technical support, and there's a lot of cooperative support organizations that governments can partner with to do this. There's difficulties in obtaining startup capital that is partially connected to the lack of knowledge of cooperatives. Financial institutions often don't know how to treat worker cooperatives and worker-owned enterprises. And so that can cause difficulties as well. As Kirk was talking about, the cost, time, and complexity of the conversion process can be an issue. And a worker's lack of capital and expertise can sometimes be an issue, especially when you're first getting started. Excuse me. There are various community and economic benefits of worker cooperatives, of course. The first is they tend to lessen capital leakage. This is really important in regards to economic development, because one of the issues of economic development is money leaking out of the local economy. Money leaves the local economy. Because the owners of the cooperative are going to necessarily live close to the cooperative, you know that the money is going to stay in the local economy and flow in the local economy. That helps to lessen capital leakage, which is a huge issue in economic development. It also keeps local businesses local. Again, you have owners that are going to live close to the enterprise. And so you know that the enterprise is not going to be bought up by a chain store or somebody outside of the community. If you sell to the workers that work at the enterprise, you're keeping the business itself local as well. Studies show that cooperatives have a high survival rate. And so that's particularly important during economic downturns, because when you're going through a recession, the economy is contracting. And so if you're a business, you have less revenue coming in. And a lot of times businesses will respond to that by laying off workers. Those laid off workers then have less money to spend on goods and services provided by other businesses. They in turn lay off workers, and you have a downward spiral. Because worker cooperatives tend to keep people employed, they will share the pain a bit. They'll lessen hours, lessen wages, but they do tend to keep people employed. That is counter-cyclical in the sense that it keeps effective demand in the local economy going while the economy is otherwise contracting. So not only do they have high survival rates, but they're counter-cyclical during economic downturns. They also are responsible for what's called the democratic spillover, and this is important as well. This refers to people that operate within democratic workplaces, and that democracy spills out into the local community. If you have experience working in a democratic workplace, studies do show that you're more likely to be involved in civic participation and democracy in your local community. So the democracy spills over from the workplace to the local community, which is another community benefit. Studies show that worker cooperatives tend to pay higher wages, getting back to the long-term trends in real wage stagnation. That's huge. And also the preponderance of low quality jobs. Worker cooperatives do pay higher wages on average, and that is a means of uplift. It also gives money to people who have high propensities to spend. If you give them money, you know they're likely to spend that into the local economy, so that has community-wide benefits. And as I said, it widens business ownership, and it's a good business succession strategy as well. So because of these long-term trends and because of the promise of worker cooperatives, many governments across the country and globally for that matter, are putting in place policies that support worker-owned cooperatives. The first is support for business conversions. So here in the state of California, one government, Berkeley, has set aside $100,000 in the next 2 years for a pilot program they have to support worker-owned enterprises in the transition to worker-owned enterprises. So some of what governments are doing are supporting the conversions, business conversions. Atlanta is doing that. They got a grant recently, and they're working with some cooperative support organizations on business conversions, and so is New York, Austin, among others. Many governments are putting in place city council resolutions. There's a number of governments here in the state of California. We're going to talk about a couple in a few minutes. They've put in place city council resolutions. This brings attention to worker cooperatives and also gets the press to pay attention as well. So it's a way of bringing attention to worker-owned enterprises. A lot of these resolutions happened, and John mentioned the year of the cooperative. A lot of them happened then, but a lot of them happened thereafter. So Berkeley, Oakland, Boston, Philadelphia, and Cook County in Illinois have all, among others, have passed resolutions supporting worker cooperatives. City governments are providing technical assistance. One of the best known governments as far as this goes is Minneapolis. They have something called CTAP, which is the Cooperative Technical Assistance Program. And CTAP has been really instrumental in supporting the transition to worker cooperatives and also the formation of new cooperatives. Boston has done this quite a bit, Madison, among others. Government and anchor procurement is extremely important. Governments are looking at their own purchase of goods and services, and they're working with local anchor institutions on their purchase of goods and services. If you don't know, an anchor institution is an institution that is anchored in a local community. It could be a hospital, it could be a university, but it's an institution anchored in a local community, and you know that those institutions are going to require goods and services. A hospital, for example, will need laundry to be done. And so if a government wants to support worker-owned cooperatives, they can look towards their own purchase of goods and services and also work with anchor institutions on using the services they need to support with the growth of worker cooperatives. And I'm going to give an example of that in a minute. They could also do some zoning changes. Again, I'm going to talk about that a bit. Educational campaigns. It's really important, getting back to the lack of knowledge of cooperatives, that governments take the lead in educating the local population on worker-owned cooperatives. Richmond here in California is one government that did that a few years ago. There was a mayor that was very supportive of worker-owned cooperatives, and she focused on educating the local population about these institutions. Richmond, Virginia, Rochester, New York, among others, have set aside money and resources to educate the public about worker-owned cooperatives. They also give loans and grants to worker-owned cooperatives. It's going to be difficult right now with COVID and the economic fallout. Municipal governments are struggling right now. But nonetheless, there have been a number of governments that have done so. New York and Madison are two governments in particular in recent years that have put money aside explicitly for worker-owned cooperatives. And if you look at that, I was following the races for the council seats and the mayor of New York, and worker-owned cooperatives are central to the discussions on those races. So worker cooperatives are really picking up steam in New York, where they have a really large and powerful cooperative ecosystem. And then they also, city governments will also leverage and pool federal and nonprofit support. Again, I'm going to talk about that in a few minutes. And they also can partner with cooperative support organizations. There's many of these nationally, and here in California, we're blessed with a wide number of organizations and groups doing work to support worker-owned cooperatives. We wanted to give a few case studies, governments that are actually working towards supporting worker-owned cooperatives, kind of give you an idea of some things that you can do and some models you may follow. And the first one we're going to talk about is one that Kirk has been involved in, which is Santa Clara. He and others have done a lot of great work there, and I'm going to hand it over to Kirk to talk about what Santa Clara has done.
Oops. No, go ahead and leave your stuff in presentation mode there, and
Cool.
I'll just speak to that.
Cool.
Go ahead and jump down to it. So thanks, Grant. The real thing that people expect governments work slow. Like as soon as you do anything in the government, everything is really slow. I would challenge that. Well, first, based on COVID response, we've had trillions of dollars spent within months. So I think government can work quickly if it's motivated to, and it needs to. And I think Santa Clara also demonstrated this. We converted in 2017. In 2019, and we are the only brick and mortar worker cooperative in Santa Clara County. Retail worker cooperative in Santa Clara County. The only one, still since 2017, we're still the only one. It's a shame. We're trying to change that. But in March 2019, we presented, I presented to committee, the Economic Development and Communications and Marketing Committee in Santa Clara. We got they scheduled a full city council presentation during a study session. And during that session, we had multiple experts come in as well as cooperatives come in. They presented unanimous support from the city council for the worker, and they created the concept of a worker cooperative initiative. And in November, they funded it with $100,000 to get things started. In March, and then COVID unfortunately hit and things slowed down a little bit, but they did create a resolution supporting the worker cooperative initiative and worker cooperatives in the city of Santa Clara. And by the end of last year, all the money was contracted with or allocated to the experts that deal with conversions like Project Equity, Democracy at Work Institute, Sustainable Economies Law Center, and the U.S. Federation of Worker Cooperatives. All the experts have come together to support Santa Clara. And you can go to the website under there, santaclaraca.gov/worker-cooperative, that you can go there and see what activities are going on, how you can get involved if you're in Santa Clara, your business in Santa Clara, how you can use the services that Santa Clara has provided. The big message here is that cities can work quickly if you have an executive sponsor, say for example, a city council member or the mayor that you know, or a city council member, to get them engaged, get them supportive, and get them excited about doing something, and then they can make something happen very quickly.
Thank you, Kirk. Another example here in California is Santa Ana. If you go and do a Google search of Santa Ana worker cooperatives, you're going to find a webpage that the city created, and they list a number of things that they are doing currently and plan to do. As Kirk was saying, COVID has impacted that a little bit, but nonetheless, it's pretty interesting. And they also have a lot of information on cooperative support organizations. You can see one down here, Cooperation Santa Ana. And it's important to note that Santa Ana is in Orange County, and there wasn't a huge number of cooperatives in Santa Ana when all of this started. So they've started from scratch, essentially. So what did they do? They passed a resolution supporting cooperatives. Keep in mind, again, the small number of cooperatives, relatively speaking, in Santa Ana. They created a webpage, as I said, regarding worker cooperatives. They also have a city liaison with worker cooperatives, so people can reach out to a particular person in the city government for support and to ask questions. They educated staff on worker cooperatives, so people in economic development and other departments within Santa Ana were educated about worker cooperatives and how they're different than other enterprise forms. And they also pledged to provide technical assistance moving forward. This case study is probably the most well-known for people that work in the worker cooperative sector, which is the Cleveland model. A lot of governments in this country, from Springfield, Massachusetts, Amarillo, Texas, even as far away as Preston in the UK. There's a city called Preston that's a low-income community going through deindustrialization, and they've been heavily influenced by the Cleveland model, and they've focused on government and anchor procurement as well as worker-owned cooperatives, and they use that procurement to support worker-owned cooperatives, and they've explicitly said that they're influenced by Cleveland, and you could read about the Preston model if you're interested. But Cleveland helped to organize anchor procurement. They got together with a number of anchor institutions, a number of local cooperative support organizations in the early 2000s, and they came up with a plan to use that procurement to support worker-owned cooperatives. They allotted TIF funds and low interest rate loans directly to the cooperative. I think it was $500,000 of direct money into the cooperative. They leveraged federal low interest rate loans, so HUD Section 108 loan support loans, and then new market tax credits were given to the Cleveland worker cooperatives. And they changed ordinances and donated land. So what they did was they looked at the local ordinances and they found a particular part of Cleveland where they really wanted to support worker cooperatives, which was in a low income area of Cleveland. And they realized that you couldn't do an agricultural use in residential zones. So they went and they changed the zoning code to allow agricultural uses on parcels that were undeveloped. And so they changed the zoning code to allow them to do this. And then they also donated land from their land bank. So they changed the zoning code and then donated land for the cooperative. The cooperative is very capital intensive. They spent it collectively, I think, $25 million. So it was a very big project. Other governments that have been influenced by Cleveland are focusing more on the model generally, which is anchor procurement and then public sector support. But nonetheless, it was very capital intensive. They created 3 cooperatives, which was indoor hydroponic farm, gigantic if you ever see pictures, a solar energy cooperative, as well as a laundry cooperative. Amarillo, Texas formed a laundry cooperative based on what Cleveland did. Springfield, Massachusetts has an indoor hydroponic farm, again, based on the Cleveland model. These cooperatives employ 250 workers and 80% of them are owners. Additionally, they've created a financial arm, which is called the Fund for Employee Ownership, which supports the conversion of businesses to worker-owned cooperatives. They've done this in a number of instances. I just want to reiterate quickly before I'm done that as Kirk can attest to, if you do decide and you work in economic development or the public sector that you do want to support worker cooperatives, and I hope you do, they're very powerful tools for endogenous equitable economic development. There's a lot of organizations that work in this field that can assist you. And these are some of them. We're going to give you some more links for more organizations, but there's lots of people that can help you, and other cooperatives as well will reach out and help with the process as well. So there's lots of people there that can help you through the process. And I just wanted to reiterate that. So if you have any questions for me or general questions, let me know. Thanks.
Yeah, so we're kind of at our Q&A stage where we can take any questions that you might have, or Neil, if you want to queue some up, that would be awesome.
No, absolutely, and I want to thank Grant and John and Kirk for doing this this morning and into afternoon in regards to the different questions. As the questions were coming up, we were firing them off in as you were going. So there's nothing sitting right now on any of the chat lines right now. So
cool. So let me just do a little bit of filler then, rather than wait till the end. I want to throw a couple things in to share. So let me just, I'm gonna.
And Kirk, as we said that we had the first question, is there anything I can do to encourage local credit unions to build a co-op?
I could speak to that a little bit. In some other countries, like Italy, for example, they have a large worker cooperative sector. I mentioned this, I think, but credit unions, by the way, are cooperatives themselves, so they have some idea of what a cooperative is. but Kirk and I have talked about this in the past, and some credit unions surprisingly don't know tons about worker cooperatives. And so what a lot of other countries, like in Italy, for example, they have large worker cooperative sectors. They actually have branches devoted just to worker cooperatives. And so part of the educational campaign that city governments can do is to reach out to local financial institutions and do workshops, or partner with local cooperative support organizations to do workshops to educate the banks themselves and the credit unions on worker cooperatives. What are their particular needs? What are their challenges? And kind of understand them. So certainly the city governments can do a lot to reach forward and work and partner with worker cooperative support organizations to do that.
Yeah, and just to echo that, awareness is critical, to be aware and to create like a little division on that. Go ahead, John, I saw you were jumping in.
Yeah, so a lot of credit unions don't actually have a business charter, so they actually can't really do business to business work. They need a special charter for that. And so it's worth talking to your credit union and seeing what they would need to do to be able to support cooperative businesses. The pandemic, of course, because of the SBA loans, caused a number of credit unions, like here in Washington, the Washington State Employees Credit Union, second largest credit union in the state, was unable to do business loans. But once COVID hit, they scrambled and got certified as a SBA lender, right? So that was a new thing for them. So I think as part of it is talking to people, seeing what they need to do, and start pushing them forward. But as a whole, I think the credit union movement is starting to see that they have a role in being more engaged in financing co-op development. But I think you just have to start nagging your local credit union officers.
And a quick follow-up to that, Carlos mentions CDFI accreditation. And I will lead that to the guys that know what that acronym means.
And
This community development.
Yeah, community development institution. It takes a little work to get accredited. We're going through the process right now ourselves, but that's also another model.
So a question that came from Nicole, is there a kind of industry or size of business that fits best? Could a medium-sized advanced manufacturing business be a good fit for co-ops?
co-ops vary greatly in the number and the size. I mean, John had mentioned the Mondragon Cooperatives. It's the largest worker cooperative system in the world. There's a collection of worker cooperatives, a couple hundred actually. They employ tens of thousands of workers. I think they operate in 35 different countries, the Mondragon Cooperative Corporation. So you have something that large and you have smaller cooperatives. So really you can have a cooperative of any size. We talked about democracy. The democracy does change a bit depending upon the size of the cooperative. If you think of Mondragon, for example, yes, it is a democratic institution, but if you're operating in 35 different countries and you have tens of thousands of employees, it's kind of hard to get together in the same way Kirk does with people in his cooperative. So yeah, I mean, cooperatives vary depending upon the markets they're in, their size and so forth. But it's possible to do it at any size, really.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I think it's a really good question around, what is the sweet spot? And you can have cooperatives 3 people, and you can have cooperatives, thousands of people. And there are examples right now in California and other parts of the country where there's manufacturing, there's service oriented, it's brick and mortar. There's technology ones. There isn't any one industry that is excluded from the model. It's a viable financial model. In our case, people say, well, how do you form? Well, LLC. Everybody knows what an LLC is. You can form your cooperative as an LLC operating as a cooperative corporation. So that's what we did. We're under the LLC chapter of the law. So everything's very clear in terms of how things are done. There are ways, there are account specific. I would suggest though, and this is part of what the orientation is you need to know who to talk to understand the nuances and difference of a cooperative like that. The benefits, it just doesn't compute. Like, we should be trained as kids what cooperatives are. I shouldn't be learning as an adult what a cooperative is so I can see if it applies to my business. It should just be another business form that we're familiar with. It's not everything for everyone, by no means is it that, but it is something for some, for sure. And it could be a very good fit for a number of people.
We got a few questions lined up here, and I also want to mention why Mission College is involved in this. Reach out to your local community college. We have classes in business. We have classes in accounting, graphic design, marketing, HR, you name it. Your local community college probably has that. And we are here to help those small businesses succeed in things that they don't know, whether it's, the one-off Saturday morning class or a question as well. So wanted to pitch that as well. Raymond has this question. Is this co-op model applicable to the new federal American Rescue Plan? And has anyone tried to develop a template in regards to accessing these federal dollars in regards to the current pandemic?
My understanding there, especially in California, there are specific things that highlight worker cooperatives specifically. We applied for the PPP loans and was able to receive them. And we've been open the entire time, so we've been able to get that. I know of no exclusions for cooperatives in the current legislation. I don't know if there's additional specifics that mention it in addition to, but I don't think there's anything stopping it that I know of. John, I don't know if you're familiar with that.
No. In fact, I was on a call yesterday with someone in Oregon, and some of the layoff aversion funds are actually available to help people. So for people do that, there's that second level of unemployment where you're not fully unemployed. I don't know what it's called in California, but it's share. There's some aspects of that where you can use some of that time towards, working on a business plan, which is, other countries are even more generous, but there's definitely some things that can be used within that construct.
And Jeff, did you have something you wanted to?
Yeah, we have representatives from the local Workforce Development Board in Sunnyvale, NOVA. We have Chris Stadelman and Luther Jackson, and they can speak more directly to federal funding that might be available. Hi, Chris. They can speak more directly to federal funding that might be available as part of a rescue or a layoff aversion program some way in which funding can be used, not to fund the co-op, but rather to help train the individuals who might be interested in learning how to run a business. Chris, did you want to say something?
Well, yeah, unfortunately, so far, no direct funding from the federal government has come to workforce boards. So we're dealing with our annual allocations so far, which have been getting smaller every year for 20 years. So where we would focus our resources is on the training. But what we'd like to do with the new monies that are going to be coming available from the feds, either to counties or local governments, is to really set up the technical assistance side so that people who are interested in worker ownership have a place to go to get assistance, to get training, information about loans, access to capital, credit unions, whatever it is, really to set up a process for people who are interested in this subject to learn more and get the assistance they need.
And Chris, you have a very good question here that you put to the chat. How would a group of unemployed workers find assistance to buy a distressed business with the intent of being a worker-owned business?
There are opportunities for workforce boards to weigh in on supporting employee structured buyouts. It's part of the law. In this case, it would probably be working with folks potentially from this group to go through the phases. But there is room within the law to do it. There isn't a ton of funds at this time, but maybe that's the advocacy we can put forth to help fund those.
I will say this, there is a state budget in California. Assemblymember Ash Clara and State Senator Josh Becker have submitted budget requests to the tune of about $36.5 million one time to fund awareness campaigns, as well as technical assistance and potentially grants or loan funds to help generate worker ownership. So that's happening right now at the state level. And we're an organization that I'm part of called the Work Coalition, Worker Owned Recovery California, made up of the experts that are in this industry that were listed on grant slides. And we have a link to that, which all of these experts are listed that you can access with all their documentation and support tools to actually secure some of that funding. And then, of course, you have Congressman Representative Ro Khanna, that is using his office to try and get a bill out there. It's a Worker Cooperative Development Act bill that he's been working on for over a year and a half. It's just because COVID, it's kind of got stuck in the legislative review process. But I would expect to see something like that come out in the next couple months. But what's happening now is at the local level, at the city level, at the state level, at the federal level, everybody seems to be aligned right now that this is something that we want to be able to support and pursue and to help fund and make happen. So I think there's a lot of good energy happening right now to getting to it.
I just want to add really. Oh, sorry. Go
real
ahead.
quick.
You go ahead, John.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
so one thing to point out, right, is that the cost of conversion is not necessarily well. The idea is really that the business, the co-op, pays for the conversion through its surplus over years. So, the exiting owner usually takes on some of the debt for the conversion. So they turn, part of that sale price would be they would participate as a subordinate lender. Then there are groups like Shared Capital and other Working World that might provide a bulk of debt equity if it's needed. And then basically the cost of the business is then done through the surplus. But also very often what happens is after the conversion, these distressed businesses see a huge spike in productivity. So for instance, I worked with one group. It was a company that was barely getting by. They were stuck in this crazy payroll cash, line of credit system. And as soon as the conversion happened, they didn't. The new owners, the workers, never touched the line of credit. They ended up expanding their workforce by 25% over the next 12 months, and they started becoming a really profitable company. It's like turning on a light switch. And I think part of that is you get new, fresh eyes in the business, and people are And then the workers themselves have more stake in it, and they really put their shoulders into making it happen. But in terms of, you know, the individual workers aren't going to be expected to put up like $20,000 or $30,000. Mostly it's, even the buy-in might be spread out over a couple of years. You're really going to be depending on the loans happening. And I've seen a number of conversions where the owners finance 100% of the sale, and what they're making in interest is actually more than they were making as the owners. You know, so it's can be a really solid deal for everyone involved.
And
I'm just
I might add that Congressman Ro Khanna is actually hosting a small town business town hall April 15th. I put that in the chat. I put that in the Facebook post. Our local assemblyman, Alex Lee, is also a part of that. So hopefully you can join that, talking about small businesses as well. And there is a question on the chat from the middle of our state from Diana, asking, how does the financing piece for cooperatives work? Are the employee owners in debt at the initiation of the co-op since it's employee owned? Maybe Kirk, go into that with your own company on that. So
Sure. So there, John alluded to a couple ways. In our case, we actually, as the former owners, we financed it 100%. We did that. We didn't have to do that, but we can do that. We did that because it's a lot more flexible. And if you have the ability to do that and you're comfortable doing that, it's a lot more flexible. We can create terms. We can change terms. Like as soon as COVID hit, we suspended all payments to on the note immediately until we figured out what was going on. Like you can't really do that if you ask Chase, hey guys, can you help us out? Like I don't really, whatever, just make your payment. You can structure it. We have a structured note. We have a 6-year note on the business, so it's paid over 6 years. We did a 6% interest. At the time, that was a standard. Maybe it's on the low end of a commercial loan, but it was everything we did to make sure that it was reproducible and it uses an example. And in fact, just this last quarter, we restructured the loan note. Right now, there's about 3 years left on the note, on that note, the major note, and we restructured that, basically extended it another 3 years. So now there's 6 years left on that, or 5.5 years left on that note, but we cut the cash flow requirement in half. So the reason we did that isn't so that we could make a whole bunch more on interest, and we'll make probably an extra $15,000 over the quarter, or $20,000 over the course of 3 more years. But what it does is it frees up about $60,000 a year in debt that is no longer required for the company to pay because they've extended the term. So now we've assigned that'll be basically our quarterly bonus. It's not a bonus, it'll be patronage. So it'll be payout tax-free from payroll taxes and all that, all legal, because it's company profits at this point. And so you can actually, there's a segment by paying dividends instead of salary, you can we actually give the employees an extra 10% because we're not having to pay payroll tax on that. So the employee or the worker that's getting that, instead of getting, say, $1,000, they get $1,100 because we don't have to pay the 15 or 16% of extra, payroll taxes, unemployment insurance, workers' comp on that.
Thank you, Kirk. And we are just right at just about 5 minutes before the top of the hour. Kirk, John, Grant, and others will stay on the chat. We'll leave Facebook live in a moment. But Kirk, kind of a summary of next steps.
Yeah, let me share my thank you. Let me share this. So I wanted to just kind of talk briefly, just to summarize kind of this workshop series. The series that we're talking about, this is kind of the intro. It's not a typical F101 co-op thing. It's kind of, we're trying to give you kind of the brass tacks of, if you want to convert your business, this type of series is going to be kind of like in the trenches, hands-on, aggressive learning, but it only happens if you're interested. We haven't created this series. It's an idea. It's a proof of concept that we're doing with Mission College right now. And if you want to do that, you need to engage. All right. So the series is kind of like it's like a 3-parter. If you're interested. We haven't created. Okay. 3-parter and then some extension things. So I will continue on. The outcomes that we talked about, they're things that once you get these things, you can get started. Your operating agreement, your bylaws, this is like a constitution of your business, decision makers. So you know how to decide who makes the decisions on various things. All the professional services, the accountants, lawyers, technical assistants, things that you're going to need to get ready to go. Create your initial committees, your board, or at least your initial board to get started, and then have a framework of what the purchase agreement would look like, at least the process, maybe not the actual number of what the business is valued at, because that's always, you know, the owner thinks it's worth more and, you know, or whatever. But, you know, the goal being it's going to be fair. Like the whole point of this is equity. It's equity, transparency. And if you're transparent, equitable, it's okay that the owner makes $2 million on selling their business because that's what it's worth. Don't try and shortchange the owner just because they're the owner. You're trying to get something. No one's trying to get over on anybody. Everybody's kept whole in a co-op, and that's really the critical difference on how this structure approaches business. Is you're not trying to extract something out of somebody. You try and make sure everybody's treated fairly and equitably in the process. We have a lot of information here. All these links go to really meaningful things. All of the groups that are all the technical systems providers. I encourage you to, you know, like I said, you will be able to download this and get to it on your own. And we've created, Grant and I created this little bit end of last year, middle last year, which is a resource guide, which helps take some of that and put it in documents. Our organization, CISA New York, we have this little thing right here on the bottom, asoni.com/co-op. That takes you to this thing, and you can go, there's a resource guide. If you click on that, there's a whole bunch of things, presentations, videos, you know, 2-pagers and things like that. But this in there is this document, and it's got a lot of information, including a document that Grant helped author and contribute to, which is just a fantastic thing on a national view on co-ops. And then I just wanted to say, you know, a huge thank you to people. Well, next steps first. If you need to contact anybody, Neil is the person you should reach out to. Here's his email address. Santa Clara has their Work Cooperative Initiative, and Mission College has created this shortcut, coop.missioncollege.edu, to get to this. But the key thing, it will not happen without your engagement. If you do not say you're interested in this material is not going to create itself. We're not going to invest our time to create this with you if you're not interested, because again, it's driven by interest. And so if it's of interest to you, we want to hear from you. And then we've committed to figuring out how to make this happen, you know, kind of that rapid conversion academy spirit. And then lastly, this is just a huge thank you to Mission College for really taking the bull by the horns here and just kind of running with this as they see the value on this and the need. And as I mentioned earlier, without Jeff Palin, who's a dean, this would never have happened. His initial interest in creating this cohort and kind of, you know, what are the tips and tricks and what do they need now? How can you get people started? Really was born out of Jeff's discussions with the city and us over, you know, this is a year and a half ago in 2019. Neil, who's been running this, Rob, who has connected people at the government level and at the local level here, Edward from helping put this presentation together and helping guide us on all this. And then lastly, the Work Coalition, just a shout out to them that they were kind of a subgroup of that to try and see if this has some legs to take us to the next level. So I just want to thank Grant and John, and I just really appreciate everybody's time and energy in making this happen.
I want to second that. Thank you.
No, thank you, Kirk, for that. And we will send out an email to you guys for a survey. Also, please let us know what we did well, what you want to know more about. Also, if you're interested in knowing more about this program and being a part of future small business seminars and webinars, et cetera, et cetera. So we are going to stop on Facebook Live, but keep it live here on the chat, so in Zoom. So if you guys have any questions you want to ask one-on-one to any of the experts here, please do so. But I wanted to thank you all for coming out this morning and afternoon.
Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. That's great. So yeah, we'll just chill here for a little bit. If anybody has any last minute things, just want to dialogue, 10, 15 minutes, 5 minutes, whatever, we're here. And if not, that's okay too. Get the real diehards now.
I just didn't want to waste everybody else's time. Kirk, I want to recruit you to sit on our local workforce development board. Please consider it. We'll be in touch.
Okay, I don't know what that is, but I look forward to hearing about it.
Thank
I have.
It's a
done
good
that.
idea.
I've done that in the past at Work to Future, and yeah, do it.
Okay. If both Rob and Jeff nod their heads to that, that's good enough for me.
Yeah, definitely.
Also, Kirk buys pizza, so that's that.
Well, I think that's why Chris invited me.
At some point, whenever we open up again, we'll use our Sunnyvale location, which actually can have some capacity there when everybody's safe and sound. Might not be till 2022 indoors, but we'll happily host you guys.
Did you hear the announcements from our governor in the past like 4 hours?
No.
Hey, now educational facilities will be open for face-to-face community colleges and unified school districts by June 15th. And he's saying now that starting in July, he's expecting all virus restrictions to be lifted.
By July, huh?
I think that was what he said, yeah. We're just, there's
crossed for the
going on here at the college. Yeah, we're not going face-to-face on June 15th. There's just no way.
I had a customer come into me a couple of weeks ago and said, we're getting to new things. So looking forward to, getting back in here when you guys can open up pretty soon now that you guys can. I said, here's the thing. We'll open up indoors when us as staff don't have to wear masks. When we're comfortable with that level, then we'll open up indoors.
I like that.
So that's kind of setting expectations. I've already set the expectations with our team. I don't expect us through the end of the year, probably into early next year. If things change and the virus evaporates on us over the next 6 months or 3 months, awesome. But we will take our own safety in our own hands. That's what we're doing.
I just want to say quickly, Carlos had a question. He's in